Welcome to Ideas, a time of conversation about all things board games. Community is built on conversations, and games are built on ideas.
Hey, my name is Brent here on Cloudy at the Chance of Meeples, and today we are doing another episode of Ideas, a time of conversation about board games and about life. And today our guest is, once again, a designer of a few games, one of them winning the Mensa Select Award a number of years ago, all about taking people on journeys, going on treks. So, from Underdog Games, today we have designer Charlie Bink. How's it going, Charlie?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. It is my pleasure. I know we've been in correspondence for a number of years now, and this is kind of our first chance to meet each other, I guess, in a way, via Zoom, but meet each other nonetheless. And so I'm talking about board games and ideas and how ideas sometimes stay as just ideas, but other times they get fleshed out and they come out in the form of art, in music, and in this topic is board games. So speaking of board games, what is your journey in board gaming in general?
My journey in board gaming. So yeah, how I got here? Well, so for me, when I started all of this, long time ago, I didn't even play board games. I wanted to get into art and animation. When I was in high school, I was working really hard to get into a school so I could work for Disney one day. I ended up at a school called the Art Institute of Phoenix in a program that was sort of media arts, a little bit of traditional animation, a little bit of 3D. It was sort of like, jack of all trades for doing graphic works. That was around, early 2000s. Around the same time, I started running with a group of friends who were like, we like board games. Have you played Settlers of Catan? Have you played Puerto Rico? And I was like, I've barely played Monopoly. But, as we all did, fell into it, loved it. I'm like, what are these? These are awesome. I love them. And the reason why that was like an important crossroads is at the time while I'm at college, I'm like, wow, it's really hard to make animation. It takes a lot of time. And if you want to make a movie, it takes millions of dollars and people. Video games, same thing. You need game designers, you need modelers, you need all this. It's very, very hard to do any of that. When I was playing some of these games, now not so much the bigger board games, but some of the card games and stuff, I remember thinking to myself, like I could do this. I don't need anyone else. Like I could make the art for the game, I could make the game, I could do all of it, and I could feel like I actually made a complete thing.
Right.
And so that was, I think, what really sparked it for me way back then is like, hey, this is a whole art form that I can do on my own. And while I don't mind collaborating with other people, I don't have to as much with this one.
Yeah. You kind of have free reign.
So that's how it started. Eventually, over the years, I ended up locally, because I'm in Arizona.
Okay.
Locally, there's a company called Eagle Griffin Games.
Right.
And just by total matter of chance, I met the owner back then. They published my favorite game of all time, which is Railways of the World. Okay. I got excited about that. I started by just doing playtest work for him. And then I started just doing graphic design work, a little bit of artwork. Eventually, I got to design an expansion for the Railways of the World series called Railways Through Time, which is kind of ironic.
Right.
Which will be ironic to people later.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was kind of my first like professional foray. I didn't do a ton for a lot of other companies outside of that. I did do a little bit of freelance for Renegade Games and whatnot. But then mainly like what really sort of catapulted me into this was trekking the national parks.
Right. That was kind of like your first big box game.
Yes, trekking the national parks. I didn't pitch it to anyone. It happened because it happened just very naturally. My parents were retired. They were ready to just say, well, what's next now that, the working life is over, all the kids are gone, etc. Our family has always loved the national parks. It's always been both my parents' dream to visit every single one of them. So they said, what time better than now? So they went around 2009-ish. They went on a sort of trip to visit all of them. Not all in one big, long, road trip, but
that'll take a while.
Over the course of a couple of years, visit every single one of them. Some of them are pretty remote.
Right.
And so while they were doing that, when they were visiting, I would, we'd hang out and we'd play Ticket to Ride, and that was actually how it started. My dad said, Charlie, you make games, I like games, you like games. What if you made a game kind of like Ticket to Ride, except it's about national parks? And I was like, seems kind of like a good idea.
Yeah.
and now here we are.
Wow. That's phenomenal. I was going to ask, one of my questions was, how many parks did you go to before you were like, this could work as a game?
So it's mostly my parents. Like I said, my parents have been to every single one of them.
Wow.
I've been to about like 24 of them, mostly because I'm in Arizona, mostly just on the west side of the country are the ones that I've been to.
Right.
But they had to go up to like Gates of the Arctic, which is like at the top of Alaska. And they had to go, like America Samoa, which is way down in South Pacific, and they had to go to all of them. So I didn't go to all of them. They went to all of them, but it was I got to sort of enjoy some of it with them. And our family as a whole has been a national park fan, and that's kind of what inspired it. What's great is, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying that's fantastic. That's so cool.
What's great is my dad was also sort of an amateur photographer, although some of his photos are really good. And so the photos in the real game, even the second edition, and some of the updates we've made since, a lot of the photos are actually his too. In the original game, they were all his, the very first printing. So it very much was like, I often say, like, it's not just a game, it's a family legacy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So like that conversation, or like that whole thing with your parents, that must be super cool, because it won Men's to Select, which is an award here in North America. And I believe I read somewhere one time that some of the national parks actually sell copies of the game.
They do. Yeah, we're in about, I want to say 30 or 40 national park sites. Now, these aren't all major national parks like Yellowstone. Some of them are like state parks and whatnot, but we're in quite a few of them. It's pretty difficult to get products into those places. Every single one of them has a different sort of set of requirements to let you in. So, but we're in like Yellowstone. We're in big ones like Yellowstone and Glacier, whatnot. We're still trying to get into some like the Grand Canyon. That's a harder one. It's almost impossible to get into Yosemite, but
maybe one day you'll break through there.
That's the hope.
And how is that, like, most designers, or maybe not, I shouldn't speak for most designers, but like to bridge kind of like your biggest passion with something so monumental must be like just crazy. Maybe it's like in reference to like maybe an art, or like a musician, that you love a song that you wrote that gets so mainstream. Like, how does that feel as a designer, and kind of a designer of your first big box game?
How does it feel? I don't know. I don't know how it feels. Like, I guess it just feels like, you just kind of get swept up with the current. I personally was surprised, like I wouldn't have, my original sort of amateur, just never published designs that I were doing, they were, dare I say, almost expected. Like, I made a zombie game, and I made like, sort of a sort of Middle Ages sort of, classic knights and whatnot game. And I liked them. I was excited about them. I had like a little fighting game and whatnot. But, they were stuff that I knew I was, there were themes that I was interested in or I thought were cool. I knew my friends, I knew other gamers were. But when the national park thing kind of happened, it sort of clicked. It was like, this has like it's something I do truly like. And it has a pretty broad appeal that a lot of people will like. But more specifically, because it was something I knew my parents would like. Right. And like, they don't like zombies, they don't like, so I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I knew that like, I wouldn't have done it, if I didn't know that like, this is worth doing. And this has appeal beyond just, I want to make a game sort of for my parents. Right. I just didn't expect it to have as much appeal. It had a lot of more appeal than I thought it would. So.
That's fantastic. And that's kind of, I guess, would be the start of it, whether you call them a trilogy, but from trekking the national parks, you then broadened the scope and you went trekking the world.
Yes.
And
so it's actually, yeah. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and so what was that? Like, that was obviously, birthed out of the first one. And people are just like, hey, you know what? The world has a lot of crazy, amazing places to visit. Can you design it further?
Sure. So actually the story about that is it's connected to the fact that I work for Underdog Games now. The timeline as such was when Trekking the National Parks was first made, there was no Underdog Games. It was just me, my family. I was working a total day job at the time, decided to just make this game with them. Right. And then once we made it, we wanted to self-publish. And actually after it funded on Kickstarter, it was even potentially going to get signed. There was a little bit of drama in my family at the time because Renegade Games was like, we'll sign this right now. We like this game. And I was like, oh, what, really?
Yeah.
But I got outvoted. My parents were like, no, we're going to self-publish it. And I freaked me out. I was like, I can't believe we're missing this opportunity. In retrospect, it was a very good thing.
Right.
Not to say that I love Renegade Games, but their business is they have to like keep pumping out new games and always push the new things. Whereas like when we kept it in house, it was able to be sort of our baby that we were marketing, that we were caring about. But that went on for a couple of years. Like, so I mean, since 2014 all the way to 2017, that would be I would call those the first edition years. And through that time, we sold almost 8,000 copies of the game, just totally, independently.
Wow.
It's not a huge number, but for a single company, not really spending much on marketing, it was fine. It was like just enough to kind of scratch by and do fine. Right around that time, I was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Maybe I'll get another job, do something. And I ended up working full time at Eagle Griffin, actually, because they're local. But then just out of it's connected to your question. Trust me, I promise I'm getting going.
All good.
With this. What happened is I met who is the current owner of Underdog Games. At the time, he was just looking to start a game company, and he was just looking for, like, first of all, he's also a national park buff, so he was just looking for people that were making games that were things that he was also interested in, which national parks being one of them, but also just games that are just sort of have a general, like, what's the word? Educational value to them, that sort of like, inspire interest and inspiration for the world. So we started. He actually wasn't even thinking like, let's publish Trek the National Parks. He just thought, you're the guy because you made something like this. And when we started, we were both like, we got to publish something. I was like, why don't you publish Trek the National Parks? And he looks back at that as a very, very good decision. Nice. But then very quickly after that's like, well, what's next? We were looking at tons and tons of other games to publish. This one thing we learned right away as a publisher is like, it is hard to find the right game to publish. It is incredibly, incredibly hard. And especially when you're a new company, you don't have a lot of contacts.
Right.
So we thought, well, in the meantime, we have to put something out. It seems like a natural next step for, visiting North America, national parks would be all these amazing destinations in the world.
Right.
So that just happened very naturally. Is Trekking the World came from that, and Trekking the World also did pretty good. It also was just sort of expanding the Underdog brand as well.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that overall answers your question. Like, it also was specifically special to Hassan, the guy who owns Underdog Games.
Right.
He is a huge world traveler. So in a lot of ways, I used to say like, I made this game for you, whereas like the other one I made for my parents, I made this one for him because he's been to pretty much every one of the locations on the map. He's traveled the world. He loves world travel. So I was like, oh, well, it's perfect pairing. I've been to like 2 of these on the map, and you've been to like all of them. So.
Very cool. And then, of course, now your latest one, let's trek even further in game design. Your latest one is the box looks amazing, to be totally honest. Like, man.
Yep. Trekking through history.
Yeah, trekking through history. And I follow the Kickstarter campaign, and it's going to be hitting retail later this year, I believe.
Yes. I don't want to give too much away, but it actually might be sooner than later. That's all I'll say. It might be even faster than we promised, but we'll see.
Oh, okay, perfect. And so that's fantastic. So I followed a little bit of the Kickstarter and whatnot, and what's the whole, not the design, but like this is kind of stepped in a new direction-ish for you as a game designer. Like, how did that work, and how fulfilling was that going through, just pushing yourself to the next level?
Sure. No, that's a good way to approach it. Yeah, Trekking the National Parks made the design, is what it is. Trekking the World very naturally was just going to sort of be, it's a love letter to the original. It's very similar in a lot of ways, but sort of a little more gamery. But if you play Trekking the National Parks, you go, oh yeah, I get it. Now we get to Trekking through history. Trekking through history is interesting. It's actually worth mentioning why it happened at all, and that is after we did the Trekking the World Kickstarter, which went very well. We did like a survey among all our backers. We said, if we were going to do another trekking game, what would you want to? What interests you? Like what would you want to see? I was expecting people were going to say, more national parks, more localized places, Europe, things like that. To me, trekking games, trekking in general, was sort of about you see is what you get. It's like you're visiting these different places on a map.
Yep.
The number one by a huge margin answer was history, and I remember just being like, what? That's not a spatial thing. I mean, yes, things happen in different places, but they also happen in different times in those places. Right. And so I'll be honest, like right away when like that came back and by no means were we like, well, we have to make this because that's what people said. But I was like, this can't be a trekking game. This doesn't make any sense at all. But people at Underdog Games are like, people really are into this. Like, think about it. Like, see if there's something you can do with this. And I was like, I'll be honest, totally pessimistic at first. Mm-hmm. And then I just had one thing. I was like, well, look, if I make this, there's not going to be a map. And they were like, whatever, that's fine. And I'm like, oh, okay. So trekking through history kind of came around because I was thinking like, okay, well, at the heart of what trekking the national parks and trekking the world is there games about travel, but travel in a sense that is almost leisurely. Travel is in like, you want to sort of take in this grand, beautiful world we have around us. We're not racing for our lives. We're not, there's no, threat involved. It's about sort of appreciating and celebrating the natural world. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, how do you do that history? And I said like, well, we just go on vacation. What if we treated time travel like vacation? So for me, it kind of came together when we said, okay, well, clearly we're starting to step a little bit into sci-fi, but I don't want this to be a science fiction game. I want this to be a history game. So how do you bridge that? And it just sort of became very simple. We said, okay, there we have a place. We call it Wayback Tours. In this version of the not so distant future, you can book a 3-day tour of history. These are paradox-free time travel portals, meaning you can go back, do whatever you want, enjoy history as it is, come back to modern day, nothing's changed. You just got to experience history as if you were going to like Jurassic Park, i.e. without things always going wrong, I guess. Yeah. Which you can expect from Jurassic Park, not in this one. So that's looking through that lens, I was like, okay, that makes sense. This is cool. And then it sort of became like, okay, well, now that spatial issues aren't like, are like sort of the core of the game, well, what is it? It's like, well, thematically time would make sense, but how does that work in? I said, well, regardless of you being a time traveler, I could time travel to 1,000 different periods in time, but my personal experience of time is linear. So while I might have visited, 10 different centuries, after about, 12 hours, I'm going to start to get tired. So the idea is you have, your tour is chrono locked to the agency where you leave off on your tour, which means you get 12 hours for each day in your 3-day tour to experience history. And so that sort of became the parameters of the game. It's like, what are you going to do with your 12 hours? And from there, everything just kind of designed itself, and it's just sort of started to take shape. And I was very happy with how it happened. I mean, like a lot of design is basically just iteration, trying it, see if it works, see if it doesn't work. And in this case, I kind of went from being super skeptical about the theme completely to being like, this works. I like this a lot, to the point where I actually think it's probably my best design game. So.
Very cool. So how did you, I know there's a lot of different events in the game. How do you narrow it down? Because history is thousands of years.
Yep.
Thousands and thousands of years. So how do you make that into a deck of 80 cards or whatever it is?
Sure. Yeah. No, we have 108 cards in the game. Okay. That are split between the three different days, like day 1, day 2, day 3. So there were parameters right off the bat. Speaking to sort of like the vibe of trekking, as I mentioned, like there's sort of a leisurely appreciation, about what these games are about. Well, okay, World War II is a big part of our history, but that's not where you're going to go on vacation. You're not going to go to Normandy Beach on vacation. So yes, part of history, but that's not what this game is about. This game is about the wonder of history. So anything that was, I would say, too controversial or too bloody or too warlike, that was just out, regardless of how important it is in history.
Right.
We wanted to focus on the more inspirational parts of history. So we tried to like find anything that was like a lot of firsts, like the first this or the first that. A lot of key moments in history we can, all relate to, so to say. We found, and this was also true of Trekking the World, is you want to have like about half of the things need to be in a sense kind of obvious, kind of like, I know the pyramids. Everyone knows the pyramids. you might argue everyone knows the pyramid so much that you're wasting your time putting it in a game, because what is anyone going to learn about the pyramids more than they already do? But iconically, that is, when you think of a world travel game, iconically, you got to have that,
Right.
and then you can sort of mix in from there a lot of other places that you haven't ever seen. So it was the same thing with Trekking Through History. We tried to pick some very iconic pieces, like you're not going to not talk about Einstein, Julius Caesar was a tough one because he has a pretty bloody past, but it's like, no, you're not going to not mention him. Like his face basically telegraphs history. But then about the other half, we wanted to go deep. We actually hired a history teacher to give us a ton of insights and recommendations on what she thought would be like good places to go, and also talk us away from some ones that she was like, look, that part of history is a little more sort of fictionalized than the average person might assume.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of that. We pulled people as well, but mostly it's just sort of like a slow narrowing down of what we think is that right balance.
That's fantastic. I know. And like you said, the design has like 3 days, and like your resources isn't time, but it kind of is, because you can move forward, but you can't go back in time. So I think that's a really cool mechanism. And like I said, I'm excited to see this one hit the table, hopefully sooner rather than later. And so let's move even further down the line. Is this kind of like, do you feel you're maybe in a box of just trekking because you've done now 3, and it's kind of like, do I keep going, or do I, because it's successful and I'm still building on this, or do I want to maybe go to a different avenue? Let's say, like, where are you at in the trekking line, I guess?
I'm definitely on kind of the latter of what you're saying. I love trekking. It has a special place in my heart. I never imagined this as a trilogy or like 4 games or whatever. Trying to like start up a business and like get something like this going, it's chaos. I wish I could say we had it all figured out. We did. We're learning. We want to be like transparent about that. I'll be transparent about that. When Trekking the National Parks started, it was just one comment from my dad, and I thought it was a cool idea, and so we did it. So there wasn't all right, well, trekking, what do we got lined up for trekking in 2027? It's like there wasn't any of that. We've talked about a ton of different possible trekking games, but none of them are for sure. Currently, I'm not going to mention necessarily projects I'm working on, but I am working on stuff that isn't necessarily trekking at all.
Okay.
There's one that might be, but I'll be honest, I'm perfectly happy if it isn't. And I think this one project could be not a trekking game and fine. And it would also prove that we don't have to try to like use trekking as a kind of crutch or anything,
right,
for games that we're leaning out. But I don't think we need to. So that's, in a sense, I'm almost leaning away from it for that reason.
That's cool. That you kind of like, that was a part of your journey, and now you can almost start a brand new journey.
Yep.
And I want to come back around. You said your favorite game was Railways
of the World. Originally it was, I don't know if you've ever played the computer game Railroad Tycoon. It was the board game version of Railroad Tycoon, but then they lost the license, but they owned the game mechanics for the tabletop, so they call it Railways of the World.
Okay. So how was that? Okay, so that's like your favorite game of all time, still to this day, your favorite game?
It's like, so it's my favorite heavier, although it's not, no one would call it a super heavy game. It's my favorite, like heavier, this is going to take, 2-3 hours to play game. Probably if I had to give like an answer, favorite game of all time, it would probably be Dominion, which I have the poster of in the back there. I don't know if you can see it. But
is that the one from like the BGG alternate?
Yeah, that's the BGG one. I love it. That's probably it's my go-to, with how it is with games. Someone says, what's your favorite game? It's like, can I give you 10 answers? But that's like my go-to. Probably could play that for the rest of my life and be happy.
That's awesome. So like, how was that for you? At the time it's your favorite game, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, can you work on an expansion? Like, was that just like, like how do you stop from like just getting all jittery and excited? Like, I get to do something that is like my absolute favorite thing to do.
I mean, those questions answer themselves, don't they? I mean,
yeah.
It's like, yeah, I was super pumped. A lot of that stuff, I think, well, I was lucky as well because, Eagle Gryphon Games is a very small company.
Mm-hmm.
There was the owner, and then there was like like 2 full-time employees at the time, I think, and that was about it. I think a lot of people don't realize how small some game companies actually are. And so it really just got down to me saying to the owner, like, hey, what if you made a Railways Through Time, game? And he's like, I love it. Let me see it. So I made a prototype, and he played it once, and he's like, yep, we're doing it. And so I was like, cool. It was awesome. It was if anything, it was kind of shocking
Right.
how accessible it was. But I do appreciate that it is not normally that way. So I'm not going to try to advertise to people like, it's that easy, guys.
Yeah, and do you feel it's even harder now for aspiring designers compared to when you put out Trekking, that so many games are coming out year after year after year, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down? How is it as a game designer to be like, man, I need to bring like my A game's almost not enough anymore. Like it's got to be like the next level. How do you cope with that as a designer, and then even as a company?
Yeah, those are the big questions. I don't. I'm sorry. Like, I mean, as a designer, I'll speak personally first. Like, part of the reason why I have pitched games in the past, and it's a painful process. Like, it's very painful, and especially the waiting and the not knowing. Self-publishing Trekking the National Parks, and this was before we were even approached by someone else, to me was almost like, well, this is the only way it's going to happen. This is the only way, like, I'm going to get a game out. I know I had before then an expansion out from another company, but all the things you're saying they're all true. I mean, it's insanely hard to get out there, and it gets harder every single year. So for me, Trekking, I never knew it was necessarily going to be a business, but it was like, I want this game to be made. I want to know for sure it's going to be made, and not something like, hey, parents, it's 2040 now, like, it finally got published. I wanted them to hold it in their hands, and so I figured, like, this is how it can happen. And at the time, I mean, Kickstarter is commonplace now, but cut back to 2012, 13, it was like, what's this Kickstarter thing? And so a lot of it was also too, like, this can make it happen. This is why I get into it. I don't know if you can even say that anymore. I mean, to put in perspective, like, Bink Inc. actually has just released a new game. Do I have it in this room? I don't. Darn.
Yeah, it's a trick-taking game.
Yes, they have a trick-taking. It's called Twin Palms.
Twin Palms.
It's actually a game my wife made.
Very cool.
I love it. Now, Bink Inc. has actually published another trick-taking game before called Pups. It's out of print now. We've sold all of them. But
is it going to come back in?
Probably not. I don't know. I've said yes in the past, just because there is a very small segment of people that like it a lot.
Yeah.
But it's expensive, and it's kind of, the answer to that is kind of connected to what you're saying, is like, it's a huge risk. Like, Twin Palms funded on Kickstarter. We did great by all perceptions, but when it's all said and done, it's like, okay, we're going to get these games, and then the actual work starts, which you have to be able to sell them and market them in an ocean of millions of other games. So from the publisher side, I can say, both on the higher level of, like, Underdog Games, which has multiple titles and a couple employees, and we've sold over 250,000 games at this point. Insanely, it's still insanely hard because of the competition. But then from the smaller publisher side, making Twin Palms, which is a very low impact game, I can happily say that the funds that it raised was enough to get it made, but that's it. Like, now we have them, and then the second half starts, and it's like, okay, now I got to do this. And so and oddly, I don't even think I'm qualified to talk about from the designer side. I know I design games, but I consider myself just very lucky that I sort of slipped into the roles that I have. The grind of going out there and trying to get your games published from other publishers, like, that's no joke. I guess the only advice I would say is just, ego is no longer a thing. You're not allowed to have an ego if you're going to do that. You just have to almost be like a robot designed to take feedback, sort through it, and just constantly find those little 1% improvements on your projects.
It kind of reminds me of, as we wrap up here, kind of reminds me, like, game design almost as like musicians, like, so often that the big top 40, obviously they've made it big, but there's how many musicians that travel in a van with nothing but hopes and dreams, and $3 a day, to the next venue to do that. And it must be very similar as a game designer that you have this thing that you're so excited about, and you're just like, I'm waiting for my big break. I'm waiting for my big break.
Yep.
And you either find it in someone, you know, strikes gold and signs it, or you put in all the blood, sweat, and tears, much like you have over the years with the trekking line, namely the first one. And it's a fantastic story, and it's so exciting to hear your journey in game design. And that's what my whole ideas is all about. And my slogan is community is built on conversations and games are built on ideas. And it's kind of like, you know what, you may have an idea that you think is great. Many people on the internet in the comments will say it's terrible, but that doesn't say you shouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Because I think so often we get hung up on what other people will say, or, you know, that person's so much smarter than me, my game is so meager. But for you to you know, put these ideas out and then to get a tangible outcome, you've accomplished so much already at that point.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. And I'll say, like, you use like the sort of the musician sort of on the road example there, and it reminded me of something. I forgot. I want to say his name is Daniel Peterson. I could be wrong there, but he used to work for a game company that can't remember. Doesn't matter. I remember hearing him talk about games once, and he actually used to be a musician, and he actually made the same example you did about like a band trying to like get their album out there and like get their music heard. But he said something, and I'll kind of leave you with sort of a positive thing here. He said, like, as hard as it is in the board game design grind, one thing that all of us designers need to be very thankful of is we actually hold a lot more power than almost any other industry. If you want to be signed as an artist, as a musician, like, you're signing everything away. Like, you're getting, you better be an absolute monumental success or you're getting nothing.
Yeah.
But if you're making a board game, you're getting, relatively speaking, a very good return for your efforts. So while it is insanely hard to get up there, it's you know, to get your game published, you know, by, like, if you want it published by whatever, Game Right or, you know, Haba or something like that, very hard to do. No one's going to say it's not. But if you do get to that finish line, you're rewarded more generously, especially if your game's successful.
Right.
But even if it's not, proportionally speaking, you're rewarded a lot more reasonably than almost any other industry, which I think is hopeful and quite great.
That's awesome. Well, this has been absolutely like just a blast, just chatting with you and finding more out about, you know, your journey in game design. And like I said, I'm excited for trekking through history and to see what else you come up with in the years down the road. And then not only just you, but Underdog Games, because I've been following that, like, I guess your company or the company you work for since they reprinted the Trekking the National Parks, the second edition. And it's just cool. And I like the name Underdog Games, that you're kind of like that. And maybe it's intentional, I don't know, but you're kind of that underdog, small publisher trying to make a big footprint in this fantastic hobby.
It had a nice ring to it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Very cool. So before we leave, where can people find out, obviously, more about your game designs and just your socials and whatnot?
So yeah, I mean, for Underdog Games and all of the trekking games right now, underdoggames.com. You can type in trekking and you'll see it everywhere on Google. You can also go to binkinc.com. That's my family's personal website. It's very dinky. There's not much to look at there. However, if you are interested in the game we are about to publish and release, Twin Palms, you can just click it, you know, and you can sign up for a pre-order or check it out more from there as well. Perfect.
Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. And, you know, there's been another fantastic episode of Ideas. Of course, if you want to find out more about Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples, we are on Facebook, Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. Remember, until next time, grab your umbrella. The forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember to grab your umbrella because the forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.